Welcome to Connected. I am your host, Haley Trimboli, and whether you are PhD curious, maybe you're navigating your program right now or wondering what your fellow graduates are up to, this podcast is your go-to for inspiring stories, actionable insights, and meaningful connections within your PhD community. Today on Connected, I am joined by Dr. David Carnegie, a leadership and talent strategist who's spent decades working with C-suite teams across global banks, asset managers, and high-growth companies. Before that, he was a curious HR leader working offshore in the oil and gas industry, where he found himself asking some big questions about leadership in these extreme high-stakes environments. That curiosity led him to pursue a PhD at Aberdeen Business School, where he studied the role of first-line supervisors on offshore platforms. So we will dive in more to that. And since then, he's blended research and real-world application in quite impressive ways. So David, welcome to the show. Where does this podcast find you today?
Thank you, Haley. You get to talk to me today from a very hot and sunny London in the UK.
Amazing. Great. Well, let's just jump right in with our first question. We're going to start sort of at this pre-PhD phase for you. And I kind of want to start at the beginning here. And I'm curious to understand some of the leadership challenges or dynamics that you were witnessing early in your HR career that really sparked your interest into deeper study.
Sure. So from an early age, I was always interested in who and what made a difference. And then fortuitously, I was working for a small oil service company where anecdotally, people expressed how one offshore shift was the one to work for rather than another one. And it was more attractive that way. And it wasn't the environment, it was the leadership. And that observation stayed with me.
Amazing. So going a little deeper here, so what was it particularly about offshore environments in particular that made you think this is worth a PhD? Like you had the question and you were already thinking some things, but because I believe, and you can speak a little bit to it, like this led you to pursue a PhD. So I'm wondering like what made you kind of think, I'm going to commit years and years of my life to this.
So the interest in this small oil service company led ultimately to doing this research work and undertaking a PhD. And the offshore oil industry, for background, dominated the northeast of Scotland, where I was from, and the broader Scottish and UK economy. And as a remote work environment, it was dangerous. And over the years, many people in this industry had sadly lost their lives. The Piper Alpha disaster in 1988 was the largest oil industry disaster, and it was offshore Scotland and Aberdeen. And much after that, there's much investment and research into this industry in order to prevent future disasters. So when I got the opportunity to do this work, although my efforts were small, I kept thinking if my work, even if it made a little difference, was very personally quite motivational.
Yeah. I mean, what a huge need, clearly, to be able to contribute to this area. And what landed you at specifically Aberdeen Business School? Like, was it the draw of faculty there that connected you to that institution? Did you, like the program that they had? How did you land on that particular institution for your studies?
Sure. I mean, it was quite fortuitous. The Aberdeen Business School is part of a much larger university called the Robert Gordon University, and they were a university in that area where they partnered a lot with the offshore industry on technical research projects. Around that time, post the Piper Alpha, and a bit later, my supervisor, a lady called Professor Rona Flynn, started using her psychology background to help address what became known as human factors in the industry. That was very attractive to work not only with her, but in an emerging area in literature. At the outset, I was very unsure what the experience would actually bring, but it was a great career decision.
Yeah. And I mean, getting into a PhD program is a huge commitment. Do you like what was your interpretation before starting? Like, do you think that you fully understood kind of what you were heading into? Did you have other folks that you had maybe in your immediate family or your network that had gone through something similar? Or was it this completely kind of unknown experience for you? Just trying to kind of understand the experience of what was ahead and how you were interpreting that.
Yeah, so I had no real role models that were encouraging in that area. It was very much me jumping into the deep end. I think it might be worth just explaining that while both the UK and the US make this significant contribution to knowledge, there are quite material differences between the two programs. So broadly in the UK, and this is very broad, there's less structure, very little classroom teaching, if any, and the research almost starts immediately. So the topic that you have in relationship with your supervisor are very critical to both help you keep going, and that underlying motivation is quite significant. So it's not, there's no taught program as there might be in the other US universities.
Yeah, this is super interesting. And when we get into sort of your PhD experience itself, I would like to unpack a little bit around sort of how your program flowed because of some of the differences from maybe a US program. And I think it's just valuable to understand the options that are out there. But for someone thinking about applying to a PhD program today, especially someone who might be working full time, even part time, or who's just been in the workforce, what advice would you have for them in looking for a particular school or trying to identify a research focus that maybe you learned on your journey?
And wow, I mean, I'm sure Haley, you'll know it's not for the faint-hearted. There's a lot of hard work. It can be quite solo and quite demanding, and I think you learn tacitly tenacity and resilience along the way. So all that said, I think you've got to be innately curious and really motivated by the topic that you're embarking on, because there's going to be highs and lows along the way. So yes, the school was important because the school I went to had a very good connection with the industry that I wanted to investigate. And then I met great people in the academic faculty that were supportive. So those were variables that are obviously important, but quite, if you can work them out in advance, that I guess that's key. And secondly, you have to be driven, unbelievably driven, to stick with it, because it's very tough along the way.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's quite a few options now. I find for different structures of PhD programs for different approaches, and so I think starting with that interest and really understanding is the university going to help me, or the faculty connected to where I am is super important and needing to be driven whether you have fully structured courses or not, like your experience. I think regardless it's an investment in your time, your energy, I mean, finances, etc. So important things to be looking out for. And I'm curious too, what was the reaction from your organization? Like, were you getting support to do this? Like, was there any sort of hesitation or worry around, wow, you're going to take on this whole new project? Or was it just excitement from your organization around studying something much deeper in that capacity? Because I feel like folks that are working and thinking about getting into a PhD program, whether they're tying into their institution or not, could probably get mixed reactions.
Yeah, so I think I was very fortunate in that this very significant and sadly loss of life many years earlier actually led to quite a lot of open doors around, this is interesting. We're trying to do research. Could we help you? Could we partner with you? And both in that industry, the oil service companies and the oil companies themselves were unbelievably supportive to getting external insight and academic partnerships. So I feel I was lucky. I was pushing what you might call an open door. I'm sure that's not always the case for others, but I was very lucky. And even then, you do meet obstacles, but I was still lucky nonetheless, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and it just reminds me, like, the importance of, like, having something like a true opportunity. Like, I don't know, like, the doors were open, but, like, I feel like everything was in place for you around there was this huge opportunity. I mean, it just seems like things kind of lined up, which I think is so important when you go, like, you don't have to have it all figured out when you jump into a program. But I think, like, knowing that there is a huge thing that needs to be explored and unpacked, especially based on something that had occurred in the past, like, just to me feels like something really important for folks to be thinking about when they go into a program, knowing that you're going to be contributing to knowledge, you're going to be contributing to theory. Like, you have to be able to explore something a bit novel or something with a big need. And so it seems like that was all
Yeah,
those pieces
the
were there for
planets
you.
the planets aligned. I was very lucky. I was very
Yeah.
lucky.
Yeah. So let's go into your actual PhD. So actually one question, like, did you apply? Like, did you apply to the program? Like, did you have to go through like a formal application process?
Yeah, there
Yeah.
was application interviews, and
Okay.
I mean, I think what swung it for me was I had this brief experience of being a graduate working for a small oil service company and having this narrative that some shifts, some working environments were different than others, and they were largely the same. And what the
Hmm.
variables were probably the people and the leadership. So I had that insight going in, which I think helped.
Yeah. Yeah. So you get in, and you're jumping in based on kind of what you shared right into your research. Curious to hear a little bit more around what it was like, kind of the day-to-day type of experience of navigating and researching offshore rigs as part of your study. Like, what were some of maybe the surprising moments, challenges that you might have encountered in this particular environment, this context?
Yeah, so one of the things I tried to do was to build credibility with the industry by this wasn't in the first year, but in the second 2 years was spending 43 days and nights on offshore production platforms themselves. One of them, from memory, was 2 hours helicopter flight north of Shetland. And with the lack of daylight, it felt like we were just short of the North Pole. I also got to spend about a week on a Norwegian platform, which was the same part of the North Sea, but just on a different piece of the continental shelf, if you like. And in order to provide some cross-cultural comparison, so I wanted to build that credibility by interviewing and observing and meeting people in their actual environment rather than doing it from an onshore perspective and a bit detached. So that wasn't easy. I think I've had enough helicopter flights to last for a lifetime. So I think that was a key part of getting established. What was
Yeah.
the other part of the question? I've missed the second part.
I think you might have put it in there, but it was just any surprising moments, any like particular challenges that you can remember from your time there, maybe the challenges or even just any funny surprises.
Yeah, I think it's very obvious now looking back, but I think for the leaders and the leadership, those that have to deliver and perform, context is absolutely everything. So it's easy to assume that context isn't, but that became part of my whole thing, that I could almost identify when the context and the environment changed, and it was down because everything else was the same. It was clearly down to the people that were there, but context and that kind of ability to lead in that context, that I think is absolutely vital, not just for that industry, but for many other industries.
Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting. And can you share a little bit, like, are you producing in your program, were you producing and working towards sort of this dissertation of sorts where you're delivering? Can you speak a little bit to that process at your school?
Sure. So as I briefly said earlier, almost from the outset, you're starting your research. You're not quite writing a dissertation from day one, but you are thinking about how it might be set out and planned. So I mean, very briefly, and you're testing my memory, I was looking at what might be the potential variables that
Mm,
would exist in a work environment, such as training, job satisfaction, personality, leadership, that would ultimately differentiate a more effective from a less effective supervisor. And that would change constantly. I was constantly experimenting, but trying to create surveys, test hypotheses, work with subordinates of the supervisors, work with the supervisors themselves, work with the supervisors' supervisors or their managers, their leaders. And then working with the oil companies and the oil service companies to discuss with them and the findings I was trying to create, or ultimately bring out recommendations that could be useful to them. So it was part academic and part commercial. So there was thinking almost started in early on in year one, and then I really formulated itself a bit more robustly towards years 2 and 3, and then towards the end you're writing up that dissertation with your whole method and your process. So that was how the program effectively was structured. And I think I had a sort of a 2 week. I mean, I met her constantly, but probably a formal 2 week check in with my supervisor to help and support, and she was amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting, so valuable to be able to like have that focus right from the start. I mean, I'm sure there's challenges that came from that, but I mean, you were just working and developing toward this research study and got to keep kind of going in, probably iterating, making it better, learning a lot along the way. What can you share a little bit about your findings? Like what leadership patterns, insights, stood out from your research?
Sure. So I was able to measure almost what might be called, I think I called it then, but I'm not sure what we call it now, but the climate of each shift, the culture of each shift and how it changed and what impact the supervisor had on the climate of each shift. And the shift would change every 12 hours. I remember this vividly. One of the sponsoring companies, when they would launch a new initiative towards their offshore production platforms, such as in the safety space, for example, they anticipated almost all the variables except that one. They didn't
Mm,
think the supervisor had such an impact on the way that it would be implemented. So
mm,
I remember sharing that in Aberdeen in one of their offices, and I think the management response, they were visibly shocked at that finding that here's this researcher, this student is now giving them an insight into you're making an assumption that everything's going to be the same, even though it presents as the same, it actually changes every 12 hours. So, it's something to take into account when you're launching a new initiative. There was a bit more to the PhD than that, but that sort of vividly, I remember that being something that was practical and commercial, and I think they found that very useful.
yeah, yeah. Did so that was going to be my question. Like, did the organization take it all right? I mean, I think some organizations might not want to hear. I mean, that's something they're not doing something, or you have to share back your findings. You found something. I think the receptivity of organizations could be really different. So curious to hear what your experience was like sharing that back. Yeah, this is great. Let's do something. Or what sort of like how did you do that? Can you unpack a little bit about like most academics get findings, it might not be at a specific organization, and they still have to find a way to kind of like what's next, what are you going to do? And it seems like in your situation it was very specific, so just curious to kind of unpack that a little.
So certainly going into industry and gaining more experience, I think it can be quite difficult to give senior leadership bad news. So you're actually presenting, here's a finding that I don't think you're going to like. And I've certainly not done that as well as I could have done. At the time though, I was just kind of this exuberant youth giving feedback and data. And I don't think in my motivation was to be critical. I was just trying to point out this effect, if you like. So I wasn't going in with an angle. I think when you're in industry, you've got maybe there's politics, there's an edge, you're trying to show something. I was just like, this is what I found. And I wasn't involved in the meetings afterwards where there was a bit more challenging conversations about we change, are we wasting money? Is this research worth doing further work with? Because, I was only so much I could do. A whole significant organization. So I think that would be my reflection. I think I probably got more aware of the impact of giving bad news later on in my career than maybe at that point. But I don't think I was giving bad news. I think I was just giving here's data. They're all it's a big engineering company. They just want data.
Hmm.
And that was useful to them. But certainly I've
Hmm.
seen it later on where I've made mistakes and the
Hmm.
politics can get in the way of sharing bad news.
Yeah, yeah, and I think probably after 3, 4 years when you're working on this, like, you're just like, it's it, I mean, I think that's the
Yeah.
value of research anyways, is like it's not a subjective. It's not like oh, I think, it's this. Like you've just done significant research to bring that data to your point. And it is definitely just more of, I've been trenched in this and this is the findings. I mean, I think that's ultimately the value of research. So yeah, can you share a little bit about, just a PhD is as I mentioned earlier, a big investment of your time, your energy, and certainly it gets challenging. And so curious if you could share, any strategies, techniques, like practical tips around what kept you going through maybe some of the more hard times in your program or in your writing or any aspect. Like what was maybe hard for you, and then what kept your feet on the ground and keep going through it?
Well, I mean, I'd love to hear your story on that matter too. I think look, I think I'm going to be the infallible author and sort of share something that's probably maybe not that useful. The key thing for me was contributing to something bigger than oneself, and trying to I think you do in some ways you get a PhD in tenacity. I mean, you've just got to keep going. There are highs and lows, and there are lots of things to learn, but it's trying to remember that that journey is super important, but not obvious maybe at the time, and then the outcome is the examination and the dissertation. But latterly, when you look back and reflect on your career, it was an amazing experience. I got to meet so many different people and connect with different organizations, different experiences. But you just have to keep going. I mean, it is tough, but it's rewarding. It's rewarding also in the end. I would certainly share that. It's very rewarding, but just keep going because it's worth it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's a great call out, is that at the end of the day, a PhD is a contribution to knowledge, to the literature, to theory, to the industry, and to keep your focus on that it is really something bigger than just you. You're entering into a larger conversation that's been happening, and hoping to contribute to that a little bit. And it sounds like just remembering tenacity. It sounds like you found a lot of gratitude through it. Like you were gratitude in those who you were connecting with and networking. Like it was just such a great opportunity. So I think
Yeah.
that can get lost when you're in the middle of it. So just remembering, that it's actually really cool what you're doing, and how fortunate you might be to be able to be in this position to contribute to something.
Yeah, I was,
Um,
I was, I was very lucky, and
mhm.
I don't mean that immodestly. I was very lucky. A lot of things, as we talked at the beginning, the planets aligned, and there are good days and dark days and tough ones, but you just keep going, and certainly when you finish writing 100,000 words, it's quite a fulfilling achievement.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. And one thing I actually wanted to ask you around too is, I think one big difference in the PhD program from other programs is the amount of writing, what you just
Yeah.
said, that the program entails. If you've never actually collected research, presented results, like the research could be very different too. So I'm thinking like the research and the writing are kind of unique, the amount of writing, unique component to the PhD. Without formal classes at your institution, how did you grow in these areas? Like, did you feel like you were entering the program already pretty good at understanding research, data collection, already pretty good at writing, or was this an area that you had to really develop in? And then how did you navigate that without sort of formal classes?
So on things like the skills, capabilities of collecting research, undertaking a methodology that was robust, and then writing it in a particular scientific style, I really wasn't particularly very aware of that or very good at that from the beginning. And I had a supervisor who, as I said, she was amazing. But secondly, just learning from reading other research documents that you come across, research papers, other academic journals. Could I write and create content to that standard, particularly around methodology, which you have to be very, you know, really think like a scientist. My stats wasn't very good when I started doing that to get rapidly better at statistics. And then I think certainly by the end of the time, you're better than the beginning. So it is almost like an academic apprenticeship. You really have to immerse yourself, work with others, read best practice and hopefully mirror and copy that to the best of your ability in your own area.
Yeah,
I
this
would
one's
certainly
huge.
not like to do it again. Once is enough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting when folks get multiple PhDs in areas. Whew. But yeah, I had another conversation with somebody who said reading a dissertation from your institution is so important, but I feel like it's the similar thing here, is that I'm staying very immersed in what good methodology looks like written out, or how other folks are presenting this, like immersing yourself in those articles, journals, other dissertations to really understand that's the outcome. It's like reading the answer sheet, right? So I think it's very important to be doing that in your program, prior to a program, even after. Yeah, and so I wanted to chat about NASA. I think you had an unexpected connection, which is just very interesting, come about with the organization. So curious to hear, what's the story here and what happened? How did it shape your perspective?
Yeah, that was kind of one of these other planet aligning points. Doing the research, you try and my one was about supervision on remote or in remote work environments. So you look at the literature and try and read up on remote work environments, um, what has been done there, what's not been done before. That is very limited. So there's a little bit of, this is in the mid 90s, a little bit of research on mines, coal mines, diamond mines, that kind of thing. And there was also a bit more in space travel, which was clearly much sexier. And Professor Rona Flynn, she introduced me to two psychologists that worked with NASA, and and they were writing on teamwork, supervision, leadership for a little bit on the space shuttle program, but they've also latterly been looking at LDSM, long duration space missions. So we've kept in touch, and actually we got to work together in a collaborative environment when I worked in financial services, where they looked at how to help teams become more effective in an investment bank. And we've kept in touch ever since. So they actually brought a lot of lessons from, oddly perhaps, from potential space missions right to trading floor and how that could be improved. So that's how it came about, and we've kept in touch ever since, which has been quite cool.
Yeah, and got to collaborate, which is that's the dream. I mean, working with folks that you're citing or referencing in your initial research is to continue that after. So yeah, very cool. It sounds like just what has been brought up a few times as we've been chatting is the importance of networking for you. Like any advice you would share for, sorry, a PhD student on, you're in the middle of your program, you might be nervous, say, to reach out to folks who are already writing on these things. What advice might you give to a PhD student who's in their program working on their research on, like, networking?
Yeah, networking can maybe land like a sort of, there's something in it. There's something in it for you. It's not always in the positive. I found most academics, when you reach out to them and ask them for help and input, they're very accommodating. The other thing about them is that they're super efficient and they're really on top of their emails, so they come back straight away. I think academics have got a brilliant way of managing their inboxes. I found them very supportive. I think most of them gave their time, their insight, their feedback very freely and very openly. A lot of the from where I was in Scotland and the UK, a lot of the literature is American based on leadership development, and so on. So I got to the real privilege to meet people who are in your magazines, your literature. They're well known. Um, they're just very regular people who are trying to make a contribution, and I found them very, very collaborative. So I had a good experience. I know some people who have said that their experience wasn't always like that, but I think I was not the luckiest ever student going. But I just found that the topic I was looking at, they were super helpful.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's
So my
important.
my advice to others would be reach out. You might be very positively surprised how
Hmm.
these superstar academics that are on television shows are actually regular people who will help.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's huge. I think you're so busy as a PhD student. And you're just citing, maybe you're reading and citing, and it can be very solo. I mean, you might be interacting with your advisor, the committee, a few students, but it's like you got to do that effort. But and I think from your experience, it was quite rewarding.
It was
So yeah. So you finished and you finished everything. Like, was it a pivotal moment? Like, was there anything when you finished your PhD program? Like, do you remember that moment for yourself, or was it like, okay, that's done, and I'm moving on to the next thing that I had ahead of me?
God, I can't even remember. I think it's not until afterwards that you realize what the skills and the experiences you've learned that you can bring to your next role. I didn't pursue an academic career. I was quite keen, having worked with industry, I was quite keen to stay in that space. What I think it wasn't overtly obvious, but when I was working in leadership programs and designing talent management for financial organizations, I was bringing a rigor and a way of thinking to them that maybe not everyone would do. I don't mean this as a negative on those who may advocate this, but if I would never bring in a massage table or a foosball table to a work environment because there's no data. I cannot find the data that this would make a difference. So why are we doing it? And then there's obviously sometimes you've got to influence senior people. They just say, I just want a foosball table. But it's only afterwards that you realize how I think transferable the skills are, how robust the thinking is that you've got to do, that you have anyway naturally, and how you can be maybe paradoxically quite a commercial person in an organization, even though you come from spending a few years immersed in academia. It's not, I think it's quite a commercial degree to have.
Mm. Yeah, I want to unpack a couple things in
Yeah.
this because I think the expectation, maybe more so in the past, probably not as much now, was that if you were getting a PhD, you're going to go teach. You're going to be locked into a university. And so, that wasn't your trajectory. You were in industry, you stayed in
Yeah.
industry, but was there any pressure for you to continue in academia? Did it ever kind of cross your mind, or was it always like, I'm doing this and then I'm going to be in industry doing the work?
I think the only sense of it was I wanted to have other experiences and be broader. I think the PhD and undertaking that research degree keeps you very narrow for very good reasons. You're making a contribution to knowledge. It has to be very narrow so that it's at the edge of the growth of that knowledge. So I was I was quite deliberate about pursuing something that was broader and having another experience. I'd also moved from Scotland, from Aberdeen to London to a job, so I was getting another different experience yet again. So not really. I think I can just say I think there are better academics or potential academics than me at that point. So I knew that my place was probably not there. I loved the
Mhm.
experience in the program and the working with the people in the university, but I knew that my destination lay elsewhere.
Yeah, and you talked about this a little bit, but I mean, you've spent your career in industry, working in leadership, learning, talent strategy. I mean, across high performing companies. You talked about transferable skills like using data, influencing senior leadership. But what other advice, maybe skill sets, capabilities, do you feel that PhD graduates who do want to get into industry, whether they've had that experience or not, like, what should they be thinking about, how to position themselves, how to find those opportunities? What sort of skills might they need to soften a little, that they had in academia, or what ones might they need to enhance to be a good fit to work in industry based on your experience?
Yeah, so I think there are, Haley, I think there are tons of transferable things that maybe need to be, off the top of my head, it depends on what the opportunity is for that person. But, I've been asked at job interviews, can you work on your own? It's like, well, yeah, I did this, or you feel you can communicate and manage stakeholders and you then explain what your experience. So I think there are And plus the tenacity, the resilience, the motivation to keep going when you're working like that. So I think there are tons of things to be able to expressly say what you've learned, and they're very transferable. And the thing that I have found is some people have prejudice to say, "Oh, you're academic," or it won't be a practical solution. That isn't the reality. That's a prejudice that exists in the industry of the universities or the academics. It's not. I don't think it's the reality. I think, mind you, it's our burden to say, "I'll be commercial. I'll tell you what works. I'll endeavour to find a return on investment that works for this project or this initiative or this investment." So it's just bringing out those transferable skills. I think is what the students need to practice for the context that they're moving into.
Yeah, and I think what I want to ask you about specifically is like, how do you bring that academic rigor, which can be kind of long-winded? I mean, I
Yeah.
remember, my dissertation was 300 and something pages too, and then I'm like, okay, how do I present this back to my leadership? Like, what did I find? And they're not going to read through this. I can't have the whole slide deck here. How do you bring that rigor of into this fast-paced business environment? Like, what strategies could you share?
Yeah. So I mean, I think, and I may not have communicated this that crisply, but I think wherever the industry you're in and you've come from academia, you have to be very, very clear, whether it's speaking in bullet points, it's articulating an issue, what the challenges are and what the outcomes are going to be. So some sort of methodology that keeps you very sharp, because no one reads your research thesis, even yourself. You probably only read it a few times, but and your examiners. Getting that crisp sharpness to your thinking, I think, would be something to practice and learn to do. The other thing is be very open about doing experiments. Like or pilots, I think you call them in industry, is this might not work. I think if we do all these things and the proper investment, the proper support from senior leaders, the environment works, then this will work. But if it doesn't, then let's just do it as a practice before we scale it. So that you keep in that mind, that kind of experimental model I think is actually quite useful in industry, because it keeps people thinking something's happening, and it keeps up the pace.
Yeah, I love that you called that out, because like that kind of hit me right away when after I graduated in industry. I'm like, okay, like I finished this research, but how can I still do research in my role? And I was like, well, I'm not in a research position per se, but it's like you can do experiments, you can do pilots, you can still iterate through the research, but on a much quicker, maybe smaller scale organization. Um, Great. So I'm curious, we're in an era of sort of transformation with a hybrid work. I mean, just constant disruption right now is sort of the norm. I'm curious, with your focus on leaders and the work that you've done, what's one thing that you think that leaders must be focusing on right now, or maybe doing a little bit differently in this current era? This is a very broad question, so
Yeah, no.
interpret it how you like.
So the era, what is it? So we've got disruption, AI, geopolitical uncertainty. Things are very different. I've read, change is accelerating, and even that's accelerating. I do worry. I mean, partly because I've got children who are at university, but where will the people come from to build the expertise if all the entry level roles and the tasks are probably inexorably taken over by AI? That is a worry. Building that entry level expertise to become the senior accountant, the senior lawyer, whatever it might be in any industry, I think is a real risk that I don't think we're fully thinking through. I think for leaders, they will always have to sell a vision, and that what will be more key is not only just selling the vision, but really listening to and understanding all of their stakeholders as they forge a path ahead. And I think the differentiator between the ones that will succeed and the ones that don't, the ones that don't will be very operational, and the ones that succeed will be much more strategic, because they'll have involved not just one client group, but many client groups as they kind of articulate and try and take their people towards this new vision. But so I think there's a lot going on. I worry about AI in terms of that entry level task piece. And I just worry we don't have the leadership capability yet to really understand what the future holds.
Yeah, and I asked that in the reference of leaders, but would you say kind of what you positioned would also apply to recent PhD graduates as they are thinking about their next step ahead, like what you just shared? Do you think that also applies for them, or is there anything else you would add?
Well, yeah, I'm sure there's parts of I don't know if an AI could write up all your references for you and put it in the proper APA style, that would be quite helpful and save a lot of time. Even though AI will automate a lot of these tasks, there does seem to feel like that it's the right thing to do cognitively to actually go through the work and understand what's required. But maybe not. Maybe in the future people will be able to do research degrees much more speedily without all that work. But I feel it's almost the badge of honor to go through the 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 challenges and the mundaneness and the checking and the really getting it right. I think those are really good skills to learn for PhDs, for junior lawyers, for whomever it might be.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting.
It's
It is
yeah.
interesting, and it will continue to be on if that is. I think it's just so real of that. I mean, you've said it multiple times, that tenacity that's built through a PhD program that comes from kind of grueling over some of the work that you have to do. And so, the question of if AI is replacing those, do you learn that? Do you get that some other place, or not? Like, how do you navigate those choices? So, yeah, interesting for students, interesting for
Very difficult.
organizations, employees. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, I have two final questions
Okay.
that I ask every guest. The first question is, what is one book, a podcast, or an article that you think that every PhD student should read or listen to?
Okay. Thank you for asking me this one in advance. I don't know if there's one book for everyone. I think my unsolicited advice would be to read as much as possible, not just in your area. Although this was in my area, I came across a US researcher called John Boyatzis, who wrote a book in I think he published 1980. So it was 1982, 1980s research on competence. And it wasn't directly related to what I was doing, but reading about the rigor and the detailed methodology in that book is absolutely brilliant. So I've kept a copy of that to this day. It's really good. So my piece would be find something that really speaks to you on that on your topic, but also read as widely as possible. There weren't any podcasts when I was doing it. We hardly had computers, so let alone podcasts. And I do have this completely untested theory that what presents as commercial and popular kind of pop psyche, pop stuff today was probably an emerging idea 20 or 30 years ago. And I think look out for them, or even try and become one. So, I think the ideas are sprinkled around and you suddenly become kind of wide known and relevant. You think, goodness, I remember reading that in an academic journal that was a bit dry 20, 30 years, ago. And so maybe try and encourage people to become the next version of whatever those might be. I'm not going to out anyone with saying what I think are the popular content today, but I think that some of the academics, some of the journals, the ideas are written not that long ago. They're really good.
Yeah, I love that. So just keep a broad library of topics and the book that you recommended, of course. But also, I
That was my
appreciate that
area,
theory.
yeah, but not for everyone.
Makes sense. Okay, final question. If you could go back and give yourself, your younger self, one piece of advice before starting your PhD, what might it be?
So at the outset, you're trying to make a significant contribution to knowledge and change the world. And that's great. But in reality, the key for me, if I'd known this a bit better, the key for me is to find some daily joy within the daily slog. It's tough, but you need to find those little moments that keep you going. And I think I managed to do it, and I wasn't always sure how I managed to do it, but I think find those daily joys in the daily slog of doing a PhD.
That is really, really good nugget there, and that I think everybody should write down and hold dear to yourself in that program, because you will need it, instead of looking at that massive mountain ahead of you, just taking those steps and finding the joy within that. So, wow, really appreciate it. Appreciate this conversation. Appreciate you sharing just the insights, the lessons learned, practical strategies. I mean, I think just it's so relevant hearing on folks who are in industry, for folks who are in academia and maybe just feels like they're in a very different world. So just really appreciate you sharing your story and coming on today. Where is the best place for anybody to maybe like connect with you or follow your work?
Well, firstly, thank you, Hayley, for taking the time to set this up and to have this dialogue. It's been like therapeutic, almost going back on our journey and trying to remember some of the things that you might ask. Please connect on LinkedIn, David Carnegie. I think it's David Carnegie, PhD. And I'm trying to, as a part of a personal discipline, write a newsletter called the Supervisors. So you can maybe find me on there and give me some comments, some likes. No hate, please. And reach out. I'd be love to connect with other like-minded people. And I hope with you in this podcast, I hope it goes well.
Yeah, fantastic. Yes, everyone. And we will link to that. We will link to your LinkedIn as well as your newsletter, which is fantastic. So I do highly recommend folks plug in to hear more just like this. So great. Thank you so much again.
All right. Thank you, Hayley. Thank you.
What an amazing conversation with David. I forgot to share this at the beginning of the show, but actually a colleague of mine at my organization where I work connected me with David because they formerly worked together. And so it's just heart of the story, heart of the podcast really is that stay connected with folks around you and even the wisdom that David was sharing throughout this episode of networking with folks, whether common interest or exploring things even outside your realm to really make you more valuable, holistic, a broader understanding, which is just ever so valuable right now as things are moving quick. And so love this conversation. Lots of great nuggets. Appreciated all of David's insight on working in industry as an academic, things to keep in mind during the program. So I would be curious to hear what resonated with you the most. I would love to hear your thoughts. Drop me a message or a comment. And thank you so much for tuning in to Connected. You can find all of the links to connect with David as well as his newsletter in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone in your PhD community. And be sure to follow along on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube for more conversations just like this. So I hope to see you next time, and let's stay connected.